your spirit and commitment. move forward with a new spirit and tagline, noble and valuable. This spirit must become the driving force behind all aspects of our Tridharma activities, academic, research, and community services. Noble reflects the spirit and commitment to always uphold the values of humanity.
Versi ini memiliki masa yang lebih ringan dibandingkan versi yang sebelumnya, dan kami sertai dengan teknologi Android untuk bisa mengubah pola gerakan yang akan digunakan oleh pasien.
We are determined to become a world-class university, to be part of global epistemic community that continues to carry out reproduction of knowledge for the future of humanity.
Terkait tantangan global, keuangan yang stabil diharapkan keuangan domestik juga tetap solid.
Valuable signifies our unwavering commitment to remain connected with societal challenges.
Ini air laut, ini air dari mesin desalinasi siap minum.
We strive to consistently be a proactive agent of change, delivering solutions for the various problems of the nation.
Sebagai bentuk pengabdian kepada masyarakat, kami siap menyehatkan masyarakat dan memasyarakatkan kesehatan.
We are determined that Universitas Diponegoro will continue to strengthen its competitiveness on the international stage, fulfilling its vision as a world-class university by producing exceptional and highly skilled graduates. With a new spirit and tagline, noble and valuable, we are confident Undip can make a meaningful contribution to local and global communities.
Undip
Bermartabat, bermanfaat.
Undip move forward with a new spirit and tagline, noble and valuable. This spirit must become the driving force behind all aspects of our Tridharma activities, academic, research, and community services. Noble reflects the spirit and commitment to always uphold the values of humanity.
versi ini memiliki masa yang lebih ringan dibandingkan versi yang sebelumnya. Dan kami sertai dengan teknologi Android untuk bisa mengubah pola gerakan yang akan digunakan oleh pasien.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Teguh Yono, Dean of Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, Universitas Diponegoro, would like to welcome you, all new students, Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, Universitas Diponegoro. As a Dean, I would like to welcome you to join in our international class faculty, which is intended not only to provide opportunities for everybody to study here, but also to improve your experience, not only in the local experience, but also in the international level, in the world-class level of faculty and university. Founded in 1969, Visipundip is one of the leading faculties in Indonesia dedicated to academic excellence, research innovation, and community engagement in the fields of social and political sciences. We are part of Universitas Diponegoro, a top public university in Indonesia that is committed to becoming a world-class university. Currently, Visipundip is home to over 6,000 students, supported by more than 150 dedicated academic staff across 5 departments, including 6 undergraduate programs, 4 master degree programs, and 2 doctoral degree programs. Our disciplines range from public administration, government science, communication science, business administration, and international relations. We are proud to implement an outcome-based education curriculum aligned with global standards, emphasizing critical thinking, problem-solving, ethics, and digital literacy. Our program also accredited nationally and internationally by BIBA, Foundation for International Business Administration Accreditation, Germany. Visipundip has strong collaboration with national and international institutions, including Wyoming University, America, Arizona State University, the USA, Leiden University, Netherlands, University of Naples, Orientale, Italy, Nagoya University, Japan, Ryukyu University, Japan, the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, Chung-Ang University, South Korea, Husong University, South Korea, University of Malaya, Malaysia, University Kebangsaan Malaysia, Queensland University, Griffith University, Australia, and many more. We regularly host international workshops, seminar, visiting scholar, summer school, and also student exchange program as part of our commitment to global citizenship and academic diplomacies. Beyond teaching and research, we are deeply engaged in community development, policy advocacy, and capacity building programs with local government, civil society, and international agencies. We believe that the university must not only generate knowledge but also contribute solutions to the real challenges faced by society. Our vision is clear: to become a world-class faculty that is globally competitive, socially impactful, and rooted in local wisdom. As we step forward into the future, we continue to nurture the spirit of collaboration, innovation, and integrity among our students and faculty members. I would like to express our sincere appreciation for your presence and support. We warmly welcome opportunities for joint research, academic collaboration, and meaningful partnership for mutual benefit. On behalf of the faculty, I would like to again welcome to the faculty. We are going to together with you, learning and developing together in order to provide your best future. Thank you guys. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
forward with a new spirit and tagline, noble and valuable. This spirit must become the driving force behind all aspects of our Tridharma activities, academic, research, and community services. Noble reflects the spirit and commitment to always uphold the values of humanity.
Versi ini memiliki masa yang lebih ringan dibandingkan versi yang sebelumnya. Dan kami sertai dengan teknologi Android untuk bisa mengubah pola gerakan yang akan digunakan oleh pasien.
We are determined to become a world-class university, to be part of global epistemic community that continues to carry out reproduction of knowledge for the future of humanity.
Terkait tantangan global, keuangan yang stabil diharapkan keuangan domestik juga tetap solid.
Valuable signifies our unwavering commitment to remain connected with societal challenges.
Ini air laut, ini air dari mesin desalinasi siap minum.
We strive to consistently be a proactive agent of change, delivering solutions for the various problems of the nation.
Sebagai bentuk pengabdian kepada masyarakat, kami siap menyehatkan masyarakat dan memasyarakatkan kesehatan.
We are determined that Universitas Diponegoro will continue to strengthen its competitiveness on the international stage, fulfilling its vision as a world-class university by producing exceptional and highly skilled graduates. With a new spirit and tagline, noble and valuable, we are confident it can make a meaningful contribution to local and global communities.
Undip!
Hello? Hello? Hi, is there anybody there?
Hello, Mister. Please wait a while. Sorry. Good morning, distinguished speakers, respected moderators, honorable lecturers, committee members, and participants joining us from different universities and countries around the world. Welcome to day 3 of the IRUD Summer Course 2026. My name is Akbar.
And I'm Adi. It is our pleasure to accompany you throughout today's program. On behalf of the Department of International Relations, Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, Universitas Diponegoro, we would like to warmly welcome all of you joining us this morning.
We'll now reach the third day of summer course, and we hope the discussions over the past 2 days have broadened your perspectives and inspired meaningful reflections on today's global challenge.
Indeed, one of the greatest strengths of this program lies in the opportunity to connect with participants from diverse academic backgrounds, cultures, and countries while learning from distinguished scholars in the field of international relations.
Exactly, Adi. Every session reminds us that international issues are best understood through open dialogue, critical thinking, and the exchange of different perspectives.
And today, we'll continue that journey by expressing issues surrounding international crimes, state power, and the challenges of upholding international law in contemporary global politics.
We hope today's discussions encourage everyone to actively participate, ask thought-provoking questions, and engage in meaningful conversation throughout the sessions.
Before we officially begin, we'd like to share a few friendly reminders. If you've just joined today's meeting, kindly complete your attendance through the link shared by our committee in the Zoom chat.
We also encourage to keep your cameras on whenever possible to help create a more interactive and engaging learning environment. Please keep your microphones mute unless invited to speak by the moderator. Should you experience any technical difficulties during today's program, our committee will be happy to assist you through the Zoom chat.
Our first panel discussions this morning will feature Prof. Srinjoy Bose from the University of New South Wales, who will deliver a presentation entitled Genocide and Global Politics, Power, Interest, and the Failure of International Law. We look forward to gaining valuable insights into how international politics shapes responses to one of the gravest crimes under international law.
Before we hand over the sessions, we like to encourage everyone to actively participate in today's discussion. Feel free to prepare your questions for the Q&A session later on.
After all, this is your opportunity to speak up, think deep, and dig deeper.
To guide us through this discussion, our moderator this morning is Mr. Muhammad Subhan M. International Relations, a lecturer at the Department of International Relations, Faculty of Social and Political Science, Universitas Diponegoro. He earned his master's degree in international relations from Monash University and has extensive research experience in political violence, terrorism, human security, and transnational issues across Southeast Asia.
With his academic expertise and research background, we are delighted to have him guide today's discussions on one of the most pressing issues in contemporary global politics. Ladies and gentlemen, please join us in welcoming Mr. Muhammad Subhan, International Relations. Without further ado, the floor is yours, sir.
Hello, can you hear my voice?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you, MC, for the sessions. Good afternoon, Professor Buse. It is my pleasure to see you today, and it's great to greet everyone today. Today's session, I will be your moderator. My name is Muhammad Subhan. You can call me Subhan for short, as MC has mentioned. Distinguished speaker, Professor Srinjoy Buse, or may I call Professor Buse, respected colleagues, committee, and all of the participants of the IRUD Summer Course. Before we begin, allow me to warmly welcome Professor Buse. Professor, thank you for joining us today. How are you today, Professor?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I hope you are doing well today, Professor. Ladies and gentlemen, we will discuss one of the most distinguished and most serious, difficult issue in international global politics today. It is about genocides, and I believe that Professor Buse will deliver and give us delightful presentations since it is very related to his background. Before I introduce our speakers, allow me to briefly mention few technical rules. The first, during the presentations, please, for the participants, keep your microphone muted, and you may raise your hand during the Q&A sessions, and maybe if you have something to add, you may write in the chat box, and I will write in the Q&A sessions. When some of you asking questions, please mention your name and briefly mention your institutions. Well, no, it is my great honor to introduce our distinguished speaker. May I read some of his achievement? Professor Buse is an associate professor of international relation at the University of New South Wales, Australia. His academic works is located at the intersection between international relations, peace and security studies, international developments, political violence, governance, state building, and global security. He has extensive experience and expertise on the issue of conflicts, peace building, political order, and state authority. He also been involved in many international research collaborations, including topic related to fragile states, transitional justice, environment sustainability, global governance, and peace building. I believe that with his rich academic backgrounds, Professor Buse is the right scholar to help us today understand how genocide is shaped not only by legal frameworks, but also power, interest, and political realities and international system. Uh, Professor Buse, thank you again for being with us today. Without further ado, you have approximately 1 hour on your presentations. Now the floor is yours.
Fantastic. Thank you, Subhan. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me to this summer course. Thank you to all IRUD participants who are joining the summer course. I hope the last 2 days have been exciting, fruitful, have generated ideas for discussion. Much of what I will talk about today may have already been covered, but I'm hoping to discuss with you a little bit more about responses to mass atrocities. So my title, the title of my presentation is a little bit different to what was presented earlier, but that's fine. So, Subhan, will you be sharing the presentation, or I can share it as well? So it's no problem. Are you happy for me to share it?
Yeah, please,
Fantastic.
Professor Buse. If you have
So,
if you have any trouble, please let me know.
sure. So I've just sent you a request.
Committee, have you make Professor Buse become a host?
Fantastic. I have control now. Thank you so much. So I'm just going to minimize everything so that you can see. So yes, thank you to to Subhan for that very kind introduction. I didn't expect you to put up my CV over there. But I think you've captured, in essence, what I do. I am Associate Professor of International Relations, and I study and teach topics in critical peace, critical conflict, and critical security studies, including issues in international intervention, political order, and its relationship with political violence, um, the rebel governance, and the political economy of state building and peace building in uh, uh, fragile and deeply divided societies and polities. So that's what I do. And over the course of the past 20 years, I suppose, I have undertaken field research in hot zones or war zones, such as Afghanistan, Iraq, and many other spaces, and I have written scholarly works on these regions, but I've also contributed to projects and programs for the World Bank and their Fragility, Conflict, and Violence program, uh, the United Nations Development Program, because they obviously work in conflict zones, particularly when it comes to rebuilding and reconstruction in the aftermath of war. So that's who I am. And a topic that is close to my heart is um, the topic of humanitarian intervention and the responsibility to protect norm. My former PhD supervisor, Professor Ramesh Thakur, was one of the co-chairs, one of the three co-chairs of the ICISS conference way back in 2000, 2001, in which he articulated, along with Mohammed Sanoon and Gareth Evans, the concept of responsibility to protect. So it's with great pleasure that I am an honor that I can speak to you about this topic. So what am I going to be speaking about today? Well, my presentation is outlined, or the topic of my presentation is humanitarian intervention and the responsibility to protect. And what we will cover today is the following. We'll begin by looking at um, a history of mass atrocities and genocide across time and space. We look at some of the causes of mass atrocities, and we look at the relationship between mass atrocity and response, revisiting the concept of security. Securing whom from harm? Individuals and communities. We look at the concept of humanitarian intervention, the justifications for such, particularly in just war theory. And then we look at some of the criticisms of humanitarian intervention, which really led to a shift in thinking starting in the late 90s and culminated in the articulation of the responsibility to protect norm in the early 2000s, otherwise known as R2P. And then I'll examine the conceptual differences between R2P and humanitarian intervention. There are obviously some overlaps, but conceptually, they're also very distinct concepts. I look at some of the challenges, the collective action challenges, the implementation challenges, and really the political challenges in R2P thinking and practice. And I'll look at the case study of Libya before concluding my reflections on this idea of preventive mechanisms, which I think will lend itself well to subsequent guest lectures that you will have today and tomorrow. This idea of what we can do to identify early on, so early warning mechanisms in preventing mass atrocities. So, as you all know already, mass atrocities and genocide have a long history, right? I mean, human history is replete with examples of crimes against humanity. Look at the 20th century alone, the Holocaust, and several other instances of genocide in the former Yugoslavia. You've had instances of genocide in Saharan and Sub-Saharan Africa. You've got an ongoing genocide in the Darfur region of Sudan. You've got an ongoing genocide in Gaza, in the occupied territories of Palestine. And arguably, you've got a genocide in Myanmar against the Rohingya population. You could also argue that there's a genocide that we're witnessing, at least in cultural terms, of the Uyghur population in China's Xinjiang province. So these images in front of you capture some of that long history of mass atrocity crimes, right? So these are pictures from the Holocaust, from grave sites in Cambodia and Southeast Asia. You have depictions of the mass movement of peoples as a result of ethnic cleansing, the forcible removal of populations on the bottom of your screen, and that could be in Myanmar and other spaces. So there's a long history of genocide, which is captured well in that cartoon image on the bottom right corner of your screen. So what have we got? We've got the Rwandan genocide, you've got the Cambodian genocide, the Armenian genocide, 20th century's first genocide, the Holocaust, the rape of Nanking during the early stages of the Second War, and obviously Darfur, which is an ongoing situation. So when we talk about mass atrocities and genocide, what are we really talking about? When we speak about genocide in particular, we are really talking about the targeted destruction of civilian population groups. The word genocide comes from, well, two twin words in the Greek language, genos, tribe, and side killing. So tribe killing, right? The killing of a tribe. So the targeted intentional destruction of civilian population groups. Intent is key to understanding, interpreting, and then taking action against genocide. Intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, uh, ethnic, racial, or religious group constitutes genocide, such as the killings of members of a group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the said group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about their physical destruction in whole or in part. So think about what's happening in Gaza today. When you are systematically destroying the healthcare infrastructure in Gaza, you're preventing the Gazan population from accessing life-saving medical needs, right, and supplies. So if you deliberately target the healthcare infrastructure of a country or polity or a region with the intent to ensure that population can't get medical help, uh, that constitutes intent to deliberately inflict harm on that group, right? In fact, recently we've started thinking about the deliberate targeting of medical infrastructure as medicide. Similarly, if you think about it, if you target other infrastructure, think about targeting water, sanitation infrastructure, um, infrastructure that purifies water, water that you and I need for consumption purposes, for washing purposes. If you target water infrastructure, uh, uh, knowing that it is going to systematically degrade life qualities, that it might lead to the spread of disease, uh, 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 in that community, then you're deliberately inflicting harm on that group. So we need to think about or expand um, the ways a government or groups of peoples, organizations can deliberately inflict harm on peoples. Um, Intent to destroy also highlights the imposing of measures intended to prevent births within a group. Again, if you go back in time to the genocides in Southeast Asia, Yugoslavia, and particularly the African continent, you will know that more often than not, women were targeted for genocide. Why? Well, to prevent births within that community. If you kill the mother, if you target the womb, you are essentially ensuring that the next generation is not birthed, right? So imposing measures, medical measures, forced sterilization, ripping out babies from wombs, um, again, targeting medical infrastructure, all of those is intended to prevent births within a group. Forcibly transferring children of one group to another group, as is what happened in the Australian context. So I'm joining you from Australia. So in Australia, Aboriginal peoples, First Nations groups have been targeted for genocide, right, through their history. And as late as the middle of the 20th century, the successive Australian governments forcibly transferred children from indigenous communities to white communities. It was done deliberately to quote unquote beat the black out of black communities, right? So you can see why these are such nefarious tools at the disposal of state actors. This movie, there's a brilliant movie that is almost 25 years old called Rabbit Proof Friends, which problematizes this idea of the forcible transfer of children from one group to another. If you ever get an opportunity to watch the movie, please do so. Now, moving beyond intent, remember I was saying that genocide has a long history. Um, uh, uh, Colonial genocide, imperial genocide by the Dutch, by the British, by the Belgian, the Spaniards in South America, the genocide of indigenous American groups. All of that history culminated in really a movement post 1945, post the Holocaust, where peoples realize that genocide and mass murder shock our moral consciousness, right? That this can't go on, that we need to act against colonial and imperial genocide. And so, what we saw in the immediate aftermath of the Holocaust was the articulation of what came to be known as the Genocide Convention of 1948, in which uh, uh, really we made a case to act against genocide and to prevent genocide from ever happening in the first place. I think we started to recognize the 1950s onwards that genocide and mass murder, mass atrocities, were intimately tied to particular drivers, particular causes, right? Such as state fragmentation. State fragmentation in the former Yugoslavia, in the African continent, often resulted in one group inflicting horrendous harm on another group, right? Sometimes and oftentimes, civil war contexts were very closely linked to genocide, at least in the 20th and 21st centuries. Again, look at Darfur, right? Where there's an active a civil war, and what we are seeing is the rapid support forces allying with their militia groups, deliberately targeting civilians. These charts in front of you articulate the rate of deaths resulting in genocide through and across the long 20th century, but also particularly focusing in on the post-90 period, right? Post-1990s period. So the chart on the left of your screen highlights the rate of deaths in genocide between across the 20th century, but particularly focusing on in that 1990 to 2010 period, that 20-year period. What we see is really spikes in rate of deaths, culminating in, let's say, the Great Soviet Terror, the Nazi, Japanese genocides of peoples in the 1940s. And then you start to see a decline in rate of deaths, steady decline. So this isn't suggesting, though, that there is no longer genocide and that peoples aren't dying, but we are just not seeing those big numbers, right? I mean, per some estimates, this great Soviet terror or the Soviet collectivization process may have robbed anywhere between 20 to 30 million lives, right? Across Stalin's rule. Obviously, the Nazi genocide, cost about 6 million Jews. 6 million Jews lost their lives. And in addition, many Roma and other minorities lost their lives, right? Possibly in total, up to 11 million people were killed just by the Nazi regime. And on top of that, you can add the Japanese killings in mainland China as well. But since then, there's been a steady decline. The chart on the right-hand side articulates some ongoing and current genocides, which targeted large numbers of civilians. So the Rwandan genocide, targeted, if you look at the number of deaths, 99, almost 100% of those deaths were civilian casualties. Similarly, in Srebrenica, the Srebrenica massacre in Yugoslavia, in Bosnia, 90% of the deaths were civilians targeted, right? And in that particular case, obviously, men, military-aged men were the targets, right? If you think about it, and we can return to this idea a little later, so oftentimes the literature will tell you and focus on women and children in genocide. But as recent literature has also shown, military age men, anyone between the age of 15 to 45, anyone who can pick up a weapon, tends to be targets of genocide. And then you've got the ongoing genocide in Gaza, where obviously large numbers of peoples were targeted as civilians. The following charts are the number of active genocides today around the world. So the map on the right highlights again a steep rise in active genocides between the 1960s and the 1990s, and then a steady fall, but there are still active genocides around the world. So the map on the left highlights some danger areas. So the countries that are shaded red, the dark red color, there are current massacres of populations ongoing. So the Rohingya being massacred in Myanmar. In Pakistan and Afghanistan, there are minority groups that are being targeted. Think the Hazaras in Afghanistan who continue to be targeted. Obviously, Afghanistan is witnessing gender apartheid. You've got Syria, where minority groups have been targeted. You've got obviously the occupied territories of Palestine, where Gazans are being targeted. Then you've got the Darfur region of Sudan, etc., and etc. You can obviously do your own research highlighting what countries are under the threat of genocide. I'd like to turn to now the causes of mass atrocities, right? I'd like to point out, I think I've got three causes over here. What I call fractionalization, grievance, and dehumanization as cause number one. Cause number two, national crises. And cause number three, government power. Now, this isn't an exhaustive list. You can identify additional causes of mass atrocity. But for our immediate purposes today, and because I've only got 1 hour, let's focus on these three. So, number one, fractionalization, grievance, and dehumanization. What happens in these instances? In these instances, higher ethno-linguistic or religious fractionalization within communities, within a country, combines with grievances groups may harbor against other groups. Typically, majority groups and grievances they harbor against minority groups, but sometimes it's the other way around. Minority groups who might have recently come to power who have grievances against former majority groups, right? So ethno-linguistic or religious fractionalization couples with grievances, group grievances, and these lead to the dehumanization of a target group, the dehumanization of the victim group. So think about the Holocaust, right? How religious fractionalization, religious grievances, Hitler blamed the Jews or blamed Jews for having lost the First World War. He felt that Jews were controlling the economy. These were instruments he used to dehumanize an entire ethnic group and religious group, right? He and the Nazi Party, really Nazi society, believed Jews to be vermin and equated them to vermin as subhumans, right? So the systematic dehumanization of an entire group of peoples enabled mass atrocity and genocide to happen. Similarly, in the 1990s, when you look at the Rwandan genocide and how the Hutus targeted Tutsis, you will know that the language that Hutus used to target Tutsis was very similar to the dehumanization of Jews. Tutsis were treated as vermin, cockroaches. This kind of rhetoric, dehumanizing rhetoric, not seeing Jews and Tutsis as human, as equals, but subhuman, facilitated the eventual targeting and the killing and the mass murder of groups. Moving on to cause number 2, national crises. Catastrophic events such as war, economic depression, or revolution can be triggers for genocide or other types of mass killing, particularly ethnic cleansing, right? The forcible removal of a group of people from one physical space to another. Now, there are 2 theories that are linked to this idea of catastrophic events, which are often catalysts and triggers. One is called scapegoat theory, where you're scapegoating, like you're blaming an entire group of people for the ills that are facing your country. You're blaming an entire group of people for the economic turmoil and instability that you're witnessing in your country. The other theory, which is associated to scapegoat theory, is this idea of political opportunity. That war, economic depression, revolution, perhaps environmental crises, are giving an opportunity to the group which is harboring these big grievances. It is giving them an opportunity to dehumanize and then kill minority groups, the groups that they are blaming for all of these ills in society and their grievances, right? The third theory is this idea of government power. The more power a government has, the more it can act arbitrarily according to the whims and desires of the elite. Essentially, I'm referring to the rule of law over here, right? I'm presuming all of you know what we mean in political science when we talk about the rule of law. Rule of law is basically checks and balances against power, right? In a lot of authoritarian spaces and polities, we tend to see less rule of law, right? Low rule of law, because the government tends to wield a lot of power and particularly coercive power. So they can get away with, illegality and criminal activity. When there is no constraint on power, the powerful can get away with what they want to do, right? So we know authoritarian governments are more likely to commit atrocity crimes. At this stage, I want to revisit the concept of security. When I am talking about mass atrocity and genocide, immediately you and I must query, okay, who are we talking about? Who must we make secure? And from what? From whom? Right? So, do we make secure civilians, minority populations, from the harm of majority groups and governments, the violent harm? Maybe we are talking about unequal rights, treating groups as second-class citizens, as we see in all of these cases. So what is the referent object of security? Is it an individual? Is it a community? Is it minority groups? When we think about security, we must also think about securing from what? From the machinations of the dominant power, the government who holds the means of violence. Thereafter, you and I must consider who and what is responsible for providing security. Is it the national government who must actually ensure that their power is checked? Is it the international community? Is it international organizations such as the UN? Is it the Security Council? Is it other countries? And finally, by what means should we ensure people's and communities' security? Do we deploy economic means and sanctions? Do we deploy legal instruments to check wanton violence? Or do we deploy violence to defeat violence, right? These are all questions that problematize the concept of security, and hence why I suggest we must revisit the concept of security. Which leads me to the first of my twin focus, conceptual focus, which is humanitarian intervention. What is humanitarian intervention? These images on your right are historical instances of typically the UN uh, peacekeepers, peace interveners, acting to save strangers, right? To protect strangers from the harms of government action. Humanitarian intervention is the use of military force to protect, defend, or rescue people from gross human rights abuse by their own government, right? Now, humanitarian intervention is a bit of an oxymoron. It's a bit of an oxymoron because you're using violence to stop violence, a particular kind of legitimate violence to stop illegitimate and illegal violence. Humanitarian intervention has a long history. In fact, for those of you who are students of history, you will know that some of the earliest examples of humanitarian intervention were instances from the empires of antiquity in modern day Iran. So the Persian Empire often intervened in neighboring kingdoms and empires. Think around Greece or Egypt to stop the mass murder of peoples. So if you're a student of history, you'll know that various Persian kings intervened to stop the mass murder of Jews and minority communities going back to 2,500, 3,000 years. So there's a long history. Fast forward to really the Middle Ages, about a millennia ago, and Christian theology and thereafter jurists played a very important role in advocating for saving strangers. So Saint Augustine was an early advocate from the vantage point of Christian theology, arguing sophisticated reasons as to why you and I have obligations to protect strangers living in faraway distant lands from harm. Okay, now these are sophisticated ethical and political arguments, which I will not go into detail too much, barring some contemporaneous justifications, which I will turn to in a little bit. In some instances, at least in the 20th and 21st centuries, the UN has sanctioned military action to varying degrees of success to stop the mass murder of citizens. So, for example, in Somalia, they haven't, been very successful. Similarly, in Sierra Leone, mixed results. East Timor is actually one instance where we see better results of a humanitarian intervention by the UN. So Somalia, Sierra Leone, mixed results. East Timor, slightly better results. And in other instances, we have seen no action at all. In fact, action was either not sanctioned or unilaterally undertaken. Action was unilaterally undertaken by a specific country because the world community could not agree to act. So, for example, India intervened in what is present day Bangladesh, what used to be East Pakistan. India intervened when the Pakistan government in West Pakistan was carrying out the mass murder of Bengalis in present day Bangladesh. So India intervened to stop the mass murder of Bengalis. Uh, Similarly, in Kosovo, we see, I think, the US um, uh, 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 not intervening. I think they intervened in Bosnia, but didn't. Oh no, they did intervene in Kosovo. They did intervene in Kosovo unilaterally because they couldn't get UN sanction, just as it would happen with the Bengali genocide in East Pakistan. There was no UN action, and so India took it upon itself to intervene. While in other situations, there was no substantial intervention. Rwanda, famously Rwanda, right? The world failed to act in Rwanda. So, just to recap, in some instances, the UN has sanctioned military intervention to varying degrees of success. In others, non-sanction or non-UN sanction led particular countries to intervene, such as America in Kosovo and India in Bangladesh. While in others, example, Rwanda, there was no action that took place. I want to turn to this idea of just war theory, which I had intimated a little bit earlier when I said, Christian theology and the jurists of the High Middle Ages were some of the forerunners of justifying humanitarian intervention. So, what is just war theory? Just war theory is essentially moral casuistry which articulates why military intervention can sometimes be necessary. And just war theory imposes limits on the conduct of war. So, for example, St. Thomas Aquinas presents a general outline of just war theory, which later scholars and jurists, European jurists and Arab scholars built on, right? So they fashioned a model of ideas, notably in relationship with the peoples of America. Remember what's happening in America in the High Middle Ages? Native populations are being massacred by Spanish and Portuguese colonizers, right? So peoples like Vittoria, Suarez, Grotius, Pufendorf, Wolf, and Vattel were very instrumental in articulating ideas of just war theory. And then we see a revival of just war theory in the 1970s, most notably the political philosopher Michael Walzer's book, Just and Unjust Wars. Now, just war theory in general and Michael Walzer, they articulated two concepts: jus ad bellum and jus in bello. Jus ad bellum refers to the justifications, the reasons for going to war. And jus in bello outlines correct conduct in war, the means of conducting legitimate warfare. And we are going to unpack these two concepts now. So let's start with jus ad bellum, reasons for, justifications for going to war. There are typically 6 considerations over here. You must have just cause for waging violence. So obviously, if a society or polity is witnessing mass atrocities, mass crimes, genocide, you and I would think that's reasonable cause for going to war and stopping that from happening, right? So you must have just cause. You must have right authority. Typically, and we'll look at this when we talk about the responsibility to protect norm, right authority is UN sanctioned. The United Nations Security Council, as the apex body responsible for global security, needs to authorize action. You must have right intent. That means you must be intervening with violence to stop genocide, ethnic cleansing, mass murder. You shouldn't be intervening to steal another country's oil and gas resources, right? You must intervene using violence only as a means of last resort. You must first try other means. What other means must we first exhaust? Diplomatic means to stop harm from happening, economic means, legal means. Only when none of those is able to stop harm must you turn to violence. You must weigh up the likelihood of success. Is my action to stop mass murder actually going to help people, or is it going to make matters worse, as we saw in Libya in 2011? And you must obviously consider the principle of proportionality. Is my action going to lead to even greater harm? If the genocide is leading to 50,000 deaths, is my intervention going to lead to 5 million deaths? So proportionality must also become a principle you have to consider. So 6 considerations in reasons or justifications for going to war: just cause, authority, right intention, means as a last resort. You must weigh up your likelihood of success, and you must weigh up proportionality. I want to turn to jus in bello, right conduct in war. Essentially, jus in bello is articulating certain ethical virtues of lawful warfare, right? There are ethical limits to action. So, for example, I've already discussed this idea of proportionality. How much force is appropriate to achieve your stated goal? Is force necessary? Is it means of last resort? And you must be able to identify or discriminate between legitimate targets and illegitimate targets. Who are you going to target to ensure genocide stops? For example, are you going to be targeting the political leadership who are obviously, intending to do harm? Are you going to target military installations which are carrying out that harm? Are you going to target the policing infrastructure, the judiciary, which are also culpable in mass murder and genocide, right? Because they uphold and buttress that coercive apparatus which is often used to cause harm, right? So who are you going to target? Or are you just going to target civilians? So lawful conduct, right conduct in warfare is a critical consideration. I want to introduce a caveat. Justification does not equate to motivation for action. Justification is too often conflated with motivation. However, justification and motivation are very different notions when examined critically. For example, if you are a realist thinker and you ascribe to the realist approach and tradition of thought, school of thought, motivations involve gaining or can involve gaining a geostrategic or political advantage in the region, right? You can be motivated to intervene because it will give you a leg up in terms of politics, in terms of relative political advantage. Similarly, if you are more inclined to a liberal tradition, you might say, well, I'm intervening because I'm motivated by economic or trade advantages. Similarly, if you are of a Kantian perspective, i.e., a cosmopolitan perspective, you might be motivated to intervene to protect peoples because you share an interest in promoting democracy and liberal values. So, as you can see, there might be different motivations that prompt action. But justification for stopping harm is not the same as motivation. Oftentimes they can overlap, but you and I, as analysts, need to be able to separate them, delineate them. Now, there is a problem in these perspectives. These perspectives, realist, liberal, cosmopolitan, they do not investigate interests of actors. They merely assume interests. Traditional approaches fail to account for the fact that there are always mixed and complex motivations driving state action. Humanitarian motivations, I might want to stop a genocide, and that motivation and intent might be very genuine, but it only forms part of a larger constellation of motivations driving my actions, right? Justifications are an attempt to connect one's actions to standards of justice, of appropriate and acceptable behavior. Now, there are several criticisms of humanitarian intervention. What are some? Well, number one, many people have observed, many scholars and practitioners have observed that humanitarian intervention is often applied selectively to conflicts. The selective application of humanitarian intervention has led to accusations that powerful states, led by the West, typically the US, were co-opting it as a tool for achieving their geostrategic objectives. There has also been inconsistent application of humanitarian intervention. Inconsistent practices and double standards have been manifest. Oftentimes, what's happened or what we witness is the sporadic nature of Western powers' interest in carrying out humanitarian intervention. Right? Oftentimes, peoples have argued that it's a cloak. When they do carry out intervention, it's a cloak for realizing hegemonic interests. Double standards. Why do you intervene in Yugoslavia, in Bosnia and Kosovo, but did not intervene in Rwanda? A common accusation is Europe was more interested in intervening in Bosnia and Kosovo because it was seen as a European issue. It was a neighborhood problem. But the people of Africa, a different race, Rwandans, different race, different ethnicity, far away issue, out of sight, out of mind. So basically, there's an othering going on, an othering based on racialized understandings of who deserves our respect, dignity, and saving, right? So these double standards have animated these discussions of selectivity. What this revealed was that there was hostility in the developing world to the right of intervention and its ideological associations with imperialism and colonization. When certain actors, led by the US, were intervening in some places but not in other places, and there was this accusation that they were intervening not to save lives but to extend control, obviously, former colonies, right, who gained freedom in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, saw the West's right to intervene as anathema. The core of the issue of humanitarian intervention in the 1990s was reconciling, therefore, the tension between the right to intervene when presented with mass murder versus the principle of state sovereignty, right? We can see this playing out today. Another criticism, which hones in on this idea of the Westphalian concept of sovereignty, when you intervene in the affairs of another state, even if it is to stop mass murder, you are necessarily violating the norm of interference, right? Which is enshrined in the UN Charter. You are necessarily intervening in the domestic affairs of other states. You're violating their territorial integrity and sovereignty. Intervention by an external power, even if it is sanctioned by the UN, is a violation of sovereignty. Intervention is therefore not permitted unless there has been a threat to peace or breach of treaty obligations. Enter humanitarian intervention, and more recently, the responsibility to protect doctrine, which complicates, both of which complicate the issue of sovereignty. This presents what many people have dubbed the intervention dilemma. After Kosovo, and American European interference in Kosovo, there was a clear dilemma presented to world society. The painful dilemma of being damned if we intervene because you're violating sovereignty, and damned if we don't. If you don't intervene, the genocide continues. That's the dilemma. Intervention would mean violating international law enshrined in the UN Charter and undermining it, while non-intervention would mean standing inside in the face of atrocities. Now, this is where R2P comes in contrast to humanitarian intervention, and says this is a false choice. This is a false dichotomy. We must reconcile the right of intervention versus the right of sovereignty. This is an inherent problem in the study of international relations. So the responsibility to protect norm proposed building consensus among countries for conditioning or limiting this right of sovereign impunity. Basically, the R2P norm is saying, hang on, yes, sovereignty is an important principle, but it does not mean states can get away with mass murder. There are limits to sovereignty. If you are killing your own peoples, you lose the right to sovereignty. Sovereignty is no longer a right. You abrogate that right. You're giving up that right. So you can see now what's happening is there's a reconceptualization of sovereignty as responsibility. States are responsible for protecting their own citizens. If they are either unable or unwilling or not capable to protect their own citizens, you give up. You lose the right of sovereignty. Sovereignty carries with it with the responsibility on the part of governments to protect their own citizens. There are several populations at risk around the world today. I have already mentioned some of these. This map articulates some. I will not belabor these points, but we can return to them obviously in the Q&A session. Look at life expectancy in some of those countries, some of those hotspots, some of those conflict zones where there are populations at risk of genocide, ethnic cleansing, mass murder. In those spaces, life expectancy drops remarkably. There's been a shift in thinking over the past 20 years or so. And what I've done on this page is articulated that evolution in thinking. Now, I'm not going to belabor all of these points because I realize we're almost running out of time. I have about 15 more minutes. But it's important to point out that in 2001, the International Commission on Intervention and State Sovereignty, ICISS, developed or articulated the concept of the responsibility to protect. And the responsibility to protect norm has three important pillars. The first pillar is the responsibility to prevent. Before genocide happens, we must ensure the conditions must never arise that permits genocide. So prevention is better than cure. We must prevent harm from ever being manifest and realized. But when harm does happen, we have a responsibility to react economically using economic means, diplomatically using diplomatic means, legally through legal infrastructure, and obviously through violence, right? So we have now a responsibility to react. And finally, we have a responsibility to rebuild. Why? Because typically, war-torn regions witnessed instability. The economy has collapsed. The infrastructure has collapsed. Spaces and places that have witnessed genocide, wholesale rebuilding of institutions is required. Why? To ensure rule of law, to ensure minority populations don't come to harm. That means you need to rebuild not just infrastructure, but the institutions of state, political, economic, bureaucratic. And I've written on this topic with Ramesh Thakur before. You can read my work which is hyperlinked. I believe the organizers will be sharing my slides with you, so you might have access to the hyperlinks. So three important pillars: responsibility to prevent, react, and rebuild, which constitute the responsibility to protect norm. What is R2P? R2P is a commitment to act in the face of crimes. R2P articulates that there are 4 crimes that necessitate and permit action: genocide, ethnic cleansing, war crimes, crimes undertaken during wartime, and general crimes against humanity. I have already covered the just war criteria, just for uh, 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 justifications, so I'm not going to belabor them, but just to recap: right authority is needed, a just cause is needed, right intention, means of violence as a means of last resort, proportionality must be considered, and reasonable prospects for success must be considered. Again, these are just some resources that highlight the evolution of the R2P norm. There are some excellent YouTube videos available to you. The longest YouTube video is about 15-20 minutes, but you can study them in your own time. So what's the difference between R2P and humanitarian intervention? Humanitarian intervention privileged intervening actors. The emphasis was on intervening actors acting to stop harm. R2P shifts the emphasis away from the intervening actor and puts the needs of victims front and center. Therefore, earlier I suggested the need to revisit this concept of security. Security for whom? From what? And secure by what means? R2P puts needs of victims of atrocity ahead of the right of any actor. As the United Nations Secretary General's report of 2004, this is Kofi Annan, states, the issue is not the right to intervene of any state, but the responsibility to protect of every state. In terms of right authority, the United Nations Security Council is the designated authority to authorize action. Military action should always be a means of last resort. And like I mentioned, R2P constitutes those 3 pillars: prevention, reaction, and rebuilding. The penultimate point I want to highlight is this idea of the sovereignty paradox. Protection is the responsibility of the territorially defined sovereign state. R2P is introducing the suggestion that sovereign responsibilities can be shared across borders by the international community. R2P therefore establishes a sovereignty paradox. It can be necessary to violate the sovereign rights of a state in order to help them fulfill their sovereign responsibilities. You can see why a lot of quote unquote global south or majority world states, states that have experienced colonization, don't like this. You can see why they can see this can be used as a justification to intervene in my domestic affairs. Nevertheless, conceptually, R2P sits in the middle ground between principled idealism and political realism. There's some challenges which I'm more than happy to elaborate during the Q&A session. I've already discussed the selectivity problem, the violation of international law and state sovereignty, so I'm not going to belabor those points. But there are a couple of others that I want to very quickly highlight. Realism. Realism will say that there's no genuine humanitarian intervention action ever. States are only ever motivated by their interests. In fact, realism will say state actions motivated solely or primarily by humanitarian considerations are not possible or morally justifiable. In other words, self-interest explains intervention. Then there's the challenge of post-colonialism, which draw attentions to issues of power asymmetry, right? How do former colonies feel when R2B proponents are saying, yeah, we can intervene when you are killing your own peoples? Supposedly, allegedly. For example, the selectivity issue is seen as, abuse of power. and about masking imperialist ambitions or hegemonies of intervening parties. Um, I believe I'm almost out of time, so maybe I'll skip over the case study of Libya. You might all be familiar with Libya. What happened? Gaddafi was using a heavy hand to basically target protesters during the Arab Spring Revolution. And European countries took it upon themselves to intervene to stop the deliberate targeting of protesters that led to the downfall of Muammar Gaddafi, right? R2P, so Libya, the intervention in Libya in 2011 was the only case, the only instance in world history where R2P was used to justify military action. But what happened in Libya? First of all, were the atrocities that Gaddafi's forces were committing against civilians bad enough? Did it constitute ethnic cleansing and genocide? Much of the empirics suggest the number of civilian deaths that resulted from Gaddafi's targeting were likely less than 1,000. So did it constitute those four crimes that R2P mentioned? Crimes against humanity, war crimes, genocide, and ethnic cleansing. What about the atrocities committed by groups that NATO and UN supported? NATO and UN were supporting militia groups that were carrying out violence against civilians. What about them? What about the law, the principle of proportionality and not ensuring you don't cause more harm? Some estimates suggest that NATO bombardment of Libya caused around 30,000 civilian casualties. 30,000 against the 1,000 that Gaddafi's forces targeted. So there are a lot of issues around or challenges, Prophet. The final thought I want to mention on today, I want to take the next 5 minutes to talk about effective prevention and response mechanisms. Alex Bellamy, another well-renowned scholar of genocide and R2P, suggests that the world has made impressive progress in legislating against the intentional killing of civilians, and they have built institutions that give meaning to that prohibition. Okay? Generally speaking, the response types can be classified into two brackets: prevention and mitigation. Prevention can take on structural and operational means. Mitigation helps build resilience to ensure crimes against humanity are never repeated, but also, constitutes the particularities of responses such as evacuation planning, right? So one is prevention, ensuring that the structures are in place that does not privilege or allow a state actor to cause harm, and also ensures there are operational elements in place that prevents harm. So the focus is on prevention. But what happens when there is harm? Well, how do we build resilience? How do we do evacuation planning? Prevention requires early warning information and analyzes a range of legal instruments and regimes, including sanctions and prosecution. I want to talk a little bit more about the warning signs, the early warning mechanisms that can help achieve prevention, structural and operational. First of all, I spoke about dehumanization earlier. I think looking out for dehumanization language in the media, when you listen to a radio broadcast, as happened in Nazi Germany and in Rwanda, now on television, the language used by politicians. I'm not entirely sure what the sound is, but I'm going to wrap up. I suppose that's my cue to wrap up. So you must look out for dehumanizing language. Language such as treating groups of peoples as animals, vermin, disease, threats is a telltale sign that minority groups are going to be targeted. So look for propaganda campaigns. Who is using this rhetoric? Why? Look for legal discrimination. What happened in Rwanda? What happened in Nazi Germany? Well, the Nazis herded Jews into concentration camps, and they legislated law that allowed them to do so. So, legal discrimination that treats groups of people as second class citizens, subhumans, that leads to their systematic disenfranchisement and then killing. Re education camps, as in Xinjiang province in China, where they are herding Uyghur individuals and community members and systematically re educating them, depriving Uyghurs of their language, culture, uh, 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 history, right? And obviously, finally, the militarization of society, as we saw in Cambodia, as we saw in Nazi Germany, right? Where the state uses people in society to do their bidding, right? Where people join the state in mass murder. These are some warning signs we must all look out for. I want to end finally on the Rohingya and the Gaza genocides. These are some examples of what you could be looking out for in terms of these warning signs. So, across Gaza and Myanmar, Rohingyas and Gazans, well, are obviously witnessing and experiencing physical violence, right? People are targeted, homes are targeted, businesses are targeted. There's physical segregation of peoples from members of other ethnic groups, right? Forcibly removing Rohingyas from their communities, spaces, villages, towns, cities, moving them elsewhere, building a fence around Gazan population, right? Blockage of humanitarian assistance. In Gaza, we are saying that, um, uh, um, the Israeli occupying forces are not permitting healthcare, basic food from reaching Gazans, deplorable living conditions for those displaced, rampant and unchecked hate speech, restrictions on movement across Gaza and Myanmar, the stripping of citizenship. Rohingyas are not seen as Myanmar citizens. Destruction of places of worship, land confiscation, sexual violence, as in Rwanda and other spaces in Darfur. There are so many ways we can identify mechanisms of mass violence and use them to study early warning measures. I'm going to stop there. It's exactly 1400 to 2 p.m. I'm going to stop there. Subhan, I think you might want to facilitate a Q&A session. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so I can see everybody and everybody can see me.
Thank you, Professor Buse. It was insightful presentation, and all of as the participants seems enjoy and passionate with your energy during presentations. We have some questions on the chat box. May I collect one by one, and or you directly answer?
Yeah, look, I mean, I can read some of these questions, so I can I'm happy to take read out some of these questions or comments and address them. I'll start with the last one. I would like to ask about so Anissa asked I would like to ask about the relationship between genocide and civil war, particularly in cases where international intervention is involved. Looking at the UN Security Council's handling of Iraq and Libya, where major powers were able to dominate the decision-making process without facing a veto, how do we assess the effectiveness and consistency of the UN's role? And building on this, how should we understand the case of Gaza? Most severe cases of genocide, does the international community? So I think Annie said this is highlighting what I had spoken about earlier about the limits of international action. That there is a double standard, right? Why do Western powers intervene in some instances and not in others, right? So clearly, what that's showing is that there are other elements operating. Perhaps it's racialized, as was the case with Rwanda. Europe didn't intervene in Rwanda because it didn't care about Africans. Racism, right? In many ways, that's what we're seeing in Gaza. right? A lot of the international community does not care about Gaza, and obviously they are politically aligned with the state of Israel. So that selectivity, that those double standards are, incredibly powerful critique points. Monica says imperialist powers attempted to construct a narrative against Gustavo Petro these past few months, the current president of Colombia, very similar to the one fabricated to bring down Gaddafi, because he disagreed with the U.S. attack on Venezuela. Again, Monica, that's an excellent point. And what you're doing is you're drawing on post-colonial and feminist approaches to understand those double standards that I've just highlighted in relationship to Anissa's observations. Ron says or asks, when a country is accused of causing large-scale harm to civilians, but is protected by a powerful ally. Okay, so exactly. Take the example of Israel and America. What can the international community realistically do? Nothing. How do you act against a nuclear-powered state? With the case of Gaza, Israel is a nuclear power. So how do you can't use military violence to stop the genocide in Gaza? How do you stop this military? How do you stop China from committing genocide against Uyghurs? China is a nuclear power state. It's a Security Council member. So the means available to stopping genocide, particularly when the ones committing genocide are powerful states or backed by a powerful ally, becomes the space for action is shrunk, right? Now, having said that, there are means available to us. Diplomatic means, first and foremost. Legal instruments which complement diplomatic means. Economic means. Shaming these countries at the international stage. And thereafter, having knock-on effects in economy, diplomacy, legal instruments are really powerful mechanisms. And I think as a collective, we need to emphasize the diplomatic, legal, economic means available to us to ensure these countries, these powerful states or states backed by powerful states, don't get away with mass murder. Fajirin asks, if sovereignty is reconceptualized as responsibility, what practical and legal criteria should determine when a state has lost its sovereignty, and who gets to decide that without creating new legitimacy problems? Excellent question. What practical and legal criteria? I'm not entirely sure about legal criteria. I think you have a few legal scholars who might be presenting ideas in that regard, if they haven't already done so. But I think in practical terms, going back to or being guided by the jus ad bellum and jus in bello principles is a useful starting point, because it delineates and identifies some of those practical mechanisms as to what constitutes ethnic cleansing, mass murder, crimes against humanity, genocide, which necessitate action. That can then determine, obviously, well, okay, you know what? You're participating in crimes against your own peoples. You have abrogated your right to sovereignty. And who gets to decide? It's very clear, the United Nations Security Council. But when the United Nations Security Council fails, because, you've got veto-wielding powers who are not interested, then the responsibility should shift to the General Assembly. Now, there is a view, and I think it's a Walzerian view, i.e. Michael Walzer, that, well, actually, it's not a Walzerian view, it's a critique of Michael Walzer. When every state that makes up the international community of states should intervene in the face of mass murder. Tiny states, think Fiji, has a responsibility. Now, obviously, Fiji can't intervene militarily, right? But what it can do is it can leverage the international community. It can dialogue with the international community, go to the UN, make speeches, articulate resolutions use diplomacy, use legal instruments. Other states can use economic instruments to stop mass murder. Oh, thank you for all the lovely comments so far. Really appreciate that. Muhammad asks, the session description points to the failure of international law in genocide. However, if international law is intentionally designed by powerful states to include escape clauses and juridical limits that protect their sovereignty, is it truly failing or is it functioning exactly as engineered? Look, that's a good question. And I think for those of you who are interested in global governance, um, who are interested in ideas of the liberal order, Western liberal order, you know that the Western liberal order was designed to uphold and buttress the interests of Western states, right? So it's engineered to elevate the interests of particular groups of states, right? And in that sense, the world that we live in, what happens to the majority world, right? I think there's a reconception warranted, as the great Amitav Acharya, the global governance scholar, has argued for a very long time now, that there's a reconceptualization needed of how we understand international order. Um, and we are starting to see the births of those pangs, since the late 90s onwards. So, for example, the BRICS countries, right? Brazil, India, China, South Africa, and Russia. Um, they realized that the Western liberal order was antithetical to their interests. And so there was a challenge that was presented to them, but there have been other challenges as well. The Asian values debate. Lee Kuan Yew was a great proponent. The erstwhile Singaporean Prime Minister was a great proponent of the Asian values debate, arguing against Western intervention. So again, coming back to your question, if international law is intentionally designed by powerful states to include escape clauses and limits, is it truly failing or is it functioning exactly as engineered? Well, it is functioning to the interests of these particular states. So maybe it's calling into question the need to re-engineer, re-envision international order. I think that's about it. There's another question from Farhan. Does the Pakistani education system teach the Bangladeshi genocide to its students explicitly or not? Another good question. I think you will notice in polities where a systematic rebuilding of that institution took place, you do, right? So, for example, in Germany, and in much of Europe, you teach the genocide, the Holocaust, why it happened, and that it should never happen again. But in a lot of countries, that's not necessarily the case. So, for example, it is illegal to talk about the Armenian genocide in Turkey. Turkey does not recognize the Armenian genocide. The rest of the world does. Turkey doesn't. Similarly, as with regard to the genocide in East Pakistan, much of that material is not taught by the Pakistani establishment, but so is true of the Brits. Do you think the British education system, up until the university level, tertiary levels, talk about the several genocides the Brits committed in South Asia, in Africa, in the Americas? No. I've taught in the UK at Durham University. I know what school students are taught and not. Colonialism, empire, the ill of colonialism and empire is never taught in the British education system. Similarly, I think, Belgian atrocities in the Congo are hardly ever taught. So it's not just, a majority world issue. It's a European issue as well. I think I've covered several questions, but I'm more than happy to, for others to, post their additional questions or use the mic to ask additional questions.
Well, thank you, Professor Puzelet. The first one for Raisa Ramawati. Can you speak to us now?
Okay, thank you so much, Professor, for your interesting lecture and your energy. My name is Raisha. I am from Indonesia, but currently I'm studying my master's in Moscow in Russia. So my question is, sometimes like states often rename like their acts of war and naming them, for example, counterterrorism or internal security measures, something like that, to
Yeah.
bypass the legal definitions of invasion or genocide. And do you think how does this language actually impact the international legal justice, and how, I mean, to what extent does this international legal framework adapt or react for this like naming it?
Look, I won't be able to answer the second part of your question because I'm not a legal scholar, but I'm a political scientist, so I can talk about the politics of naming and labeling. What are the politics of naming and labeling? Names are the consequences of things, Dante, right? Uh, Naming something allows for its legitimation. It allows us to take action. Naming what? War on drugs. Legitimizes action that we take against drug smuggling, right? Drug production, drug smuggling, drug consumption. It allows the government to introduce bills, laws. Similarly, at the international government level or global governance level, the UN or actors at the United Nations Security Council, they name things terrorism, insurgency to legitimize policy action, right? It's a communication mechanism that also tries to generate support from peoples, right? Okay, so a national actor might want to generate support internationally or domestically, right? So naming things and categorizing helps justify and then legitimize policy in action. That's the first thing that comes to mind when we think about naming, labeling terrorism, terrorist, insurgency, insurgent. Essentially, I suppose what I'm trying to say is naming something helps bring to bear the plethora of legal, military, economic instruments available to a government actor or an international body.
Well, thank you, Professor Puse. Is that enough, Raisha?
Yes, thank you so much for your answer.
Okay,
No worries. I think there are a couple of other questions, but
yeah, we still have 15 minutes, but we will collect some of the question. Can you continue to Rafif Al Farouk? Please bring your thoughts to us.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. Um, First of all, Rafif, I'm from Indonesia. I would like to ask about the usage of UN peacekeeping troops in terms of humanitarian intervention, which in the principles it stated that the UN peacekeeping mission, especially the troop, it could only work in a conflict once it has the consent of the hostile parties. Is it correct? Now, in this condition, shall the UNSC resolution has been out and UN peacekeeping mission has already been preparing on that conflict. However, there are there are no consent from the hostile party. Should the what would we do in this situation, and what could be done in this situation?
okay. So if I've understood your question, Rafif, I think what you're asking is peacekeepers need the consent of the host country to be able to carry out their activities. What happens when the host country does not give them permission, right? I think that's the question, right? I think Rafif is frozen, but I think that was the question. Well, there are two ideas to consider over here. Number one, peacekeeping is particularly Peacekeeping is a different concept to peace enforcement. When two countries are at war and you want a buffer, that's when you have peacekeepers come in, right? Sometimes, obviously, when you have a civil war, an incumbent government fighting, um, a rebel government, you can have peacekeepers come in to segregate them. Typically, when we're talking about genocide, it's no longer about peacekeeping, which requires the country's whole permission. The whole idea in terms of peace enforcement per the responsibility to protect norm is if you are committing those crimes, you have lost your right to sovereignty. You have abrogated it. You've given it up. Therefore, we don't need your permission. Peace enforcers can go in to stop without requiring permission from the host country because you have given up your right to sovereignty. Obviously, now you can see why majority world countries, particularly those countries with a colonial past, um, uh, who've experienced colonial violence, don't like that.
Well, we can we collect two or three last question,
Sure.
Professor Kustik? Okay. Now we move to Nadia Sista. Can you bring your thought now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so first off, thank you, Sir Bocha, for your insightful explanation. Also, thank you for giving me the opportunity to raise a concern that has been actually running around my mind. So I'm Nadia from Pelita Harapan University and Bina Nusantara University. So the case of crimes against humanity that I'm pointing out, it's a bit different from cases you've explained. It's about the Uyghurs, but I am aware that you've mentioned about it. So we all know now in the era of contested narrative, great power competition, US, China, and evolving interpretations of international law. In your opinion, how can global leaders, including countries with large Muslim populations, as we know, their voices needed, right, to support global actions to stand with justice, multilateral institutions, and civil society to take an action towards this issue by considering tensions between respecting the sovereign integrity aims to respond to the systematic mass detention, cultural erasure, forced labor, and demographic engineering targeting the Uyghur population, particularly when determining whether these acts crossed the threshold of genocide under the 1948 convention, justifying calls for humanitarian intervention while accounting for the selective nature of past international condemnations and interventions, the economic interdependence and strategic rivalries that shape state behavior, the risk of escalation and ineffective virtue signaling through sanctions, rhetorical declarations, and the long-term implications for the credibility of the rules-based international order and minority protections worldwide. Thank you so much.
I'm so sorry, but I'm not entirely sure what the question is. Is your question about what Muslim countries, Muslim majority countries can do in the face of mass murder in Gaza, in Xinjiang, or even in parts of Africa? Or is your question more about this erosion of norms and how do we check that erosion?
The second one, but
Okay.
specifically towards the Uyghur case only.
Yeah, look, I mean, no, I'm not entirely sure how the two questions are related then. I'm not entirely sure how I can be specific about the Uyghur community. I can speak in a general sense. In a general sense, what the various instances of genocide around the world are showing, current ones are showing, is a few things. Number one, that powerful countries don't care. They just don't care. Um, call it isolation. I mean, Trump came to power promising isolation. He's actually been a very interventionist leader, right? So I think there's a lack of care being shown by populist leaders around the world, by leaders who are not champions of democratic institutions. They are power hungry. So think Trump, think Duterte in the Philippines, think Bolsonaro in Brazil, think Modi in India. What we are seeing is democratic backsliding around the world, right? So leaders and their governments who are not necessarily interested in democratic institutions, they're not necessarily interested in um, cooperative behavior, and they're not necessarily interested in saving strangers, right? In far-flung areas. Particularly when there's a racial or religious line that separates in-group from out-group. What we are seeing with the plethora of genocides is a shrinking of that democratic space within which we can carry out collective action behavior, right? So when you've got a problem such as genocide, it is a collective action problem. How does the world come together to stop the genocide and then ensure it never happens again? That's a classic collective action problem. It's a classic coordination problem. Okay, America will say we're tired of playing the policeman of the world, right? Why is it always us who has to intervene to stop a genocide? Well, you're really the only country that has the means, other than China, to stop a genocide. China has obviously been, up until maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, China had been incredibly reluctant to militarily intervene any space outside of Chinese territory, right? Unless they claim a space. Um, that's sort of changing with their actions in Africa, but it's really the US who has the means to act militarily and stop a genocide. Fiji doesn't. So it's a coordination problem. How do you get small country, medium powers, big countries to coordinate and stop a genocide, particularly when they have different interests and motivations for action? So what's happening today is within this shrinking space of democratic culture, we are finding that the actors who would be best positioned to intervene are refusing to do so, like Trump, like the UK, France, who are still military powers in their own right and Security Council members, but not great powers. Um, and obviously, Russia has its own issues. So, shrinking space is my answer. I don't know if I've answered your question there, but yeah.
Thank you so much, sir.
Well, since we are approaching the end of the session, we will take one final questions, I guess, from Muhammad Rakib, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Professor Bose, for being true and concerned about the humanitarian crises. So I had the question that Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, and it's heavily isolated by international sanctions, economic, sports, airspace, cultural, and so on. And the US, EU, and their allies have frozen hundreds of billions in central bank assets. They banned Russia from FIFA, UEFA, and other European sports, as well as from Winter Olympics. So, bravo! Now the world has woke up from the blindness and they are supporting humanity. But there are on the other side of the mirror, we can see that Israelis is still killing people in Palestine. According to a news from the BBC 11 hours ago, Israeli again killed 11 Palestinians, and it's not stop, it's continuous. But still they are not facing any sanctions, any ban from sports, despite in late June 2026, Israeli forces has killed Palestinian goalkeeper in the northwest of Khan Yunis, Gaza, but still they are not facing any ban. So my question is here that you mentioned earlier about the Security Council's failure and General Assembly's emergency meeting after 10 days of vetoing. But in reality, General Assembly doesn't really have any real power, expect recommendation, and which is really doesn't work. So, Professor, according to you, what specific actions can the world now take when major international and political actors are failing continuously and playing blind games?
Yeah, it's a good question. Unfortunately, many of the countries which are in a position to take action and stop the genocide in Darfur, in Gaza, Myanmar won't. In some of those cases, European countries are actively culpable in the genocide. If you are providing arms, like the Brits are doing, even my country, Australia, we are doing the same. India, if you are providing arms, weapons to Israel that you're going to then deploy against the civilian population in Gaza, you're culpable in that genocide. So a lot of the Western European countries are culpable in the genocide of Gazans. With Myanmar and Darfur, for example, there's hardly any action. There is some work being done in displacement camps by the UN and other humanitarian organizations who are more focused on delivering aid, um, but they're not focused on holding the Myanmar junta, to account for their crimes against humanity. They're not interested in stopping the militias and the RSF in Darfur. In fact, many of the Gulf countries are culpable in these genocides too. The UAE, for example, is actively arming the RSF against the genocide in the genocide in Darfur. They're actively supplying weapons, logistical support to the Rapid Support Forces in Darfur, enabling the RSF to commit genocide. So the Gulf countries are just as equally, responsible for some of the ills around the world, just as the European states are. If the European states are culpable in Israel, the Gulf countries are culpable in much of the Horn of Africa, which sees continued instability and the targeting of civilians.
Well, thank you, Professor Pusi, for your excellent presentation and thoughtful responses. Well, on behalf of the committee, we would like to sincere appreciation for your joining us today, and I hope this session will inspiring for all of the participants. Before we close these sessions, we will have short documentation session, I guess. Please, the committee, can you guide us? And participant, can you turn your camera on?
Okay, before we continue to our next discussion, let's take a moment for a documentation session. Kindly turn on your camera and give us your brightest smile. Hold on and let me begin. Okay, 1, 2, 3, smile. Another one. 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Well, that's conclude our sessions today with Professor Srinjoy Pusi. Thank you very much, Professor. Now I will return the session to the MC.
Okay, well, I'll say my goodbyes now. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for joining the session. Great questions, by the way, so thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much to our respected speaker and moderator, Prof. Srinjoy Bose and Mr. Muhammad Subhan, M. International Relations, for such an insightful and thought-provoking discussion.
Today's session has provided us with valuable perspective on the humanitarian intervention and the responsibility to protect. We hope the discussion has inspired all of us to reflect more critically on the relationships between power, justice, and accountability in global politics.
We would also like to thank all participants for your thoughtful questions and active engagement throughout the session. We truly appreciate your enthusiasm and participation. We will now have a lunch break before continuing with our afternoon program.
Kindly rejoin the Zoom meeting by 1:30 p.m. GMT +7 for the registration and attendance check. This will also give everyone enough time to settle in before the next sessions begins.
Our second panel discussion will officially start at 2:15 p.m. We encourage everyone to return on time so we can begin the afternoon session smoothly.
Enjoy your lunch break, everyone. We look forward to seeing you again this afternoon.